Hi, my name is Iviva and I'm a Brooklyn-based artist. In collaboration with Director of Gardens Sam Lewis at Old Stone House at Washington Park, we are growing this plant, Japanese indigo, which produces blue dye, as well as flax and cotton, all colonial cash crops that were grown by enslaved Africans and Native Americans. This is one of the types of cotton we're growing. This is flax, which the Dutch introduced in the 1600s to Brooklyn. Growing these colonial cash crops is one way to acknowledge the enslaved foundational labor that built this country and to give people an opportunity to learn more about textiles and agriculture. This video focuses on several ways to use Japanese indigo to make dye. To start, I harvested by using my scissors to cut the plants several inches from the top. Only indigo leaves contain dye. My first step in the salt rub method is to remove the leaves from the stems and place them in a bowl or basin. Dyeing with fresh indigo leaves requires a lot of leaves. I have to keep going until my bowl is full. After about 15 to 20 minutes, I finally have enough leaves. And now I can stop pulling them and get sea salt and pour a healthy serving onto my leaves. The salt will act like a mordant that will allow the dye to stick to silk fabric. For the next step, I put on vinyl gloves so that my fingers and fingernails do not turn blue from the leaves. I am going to use my hands to massage or knead the leaves as though they are dough and the salt so that the salt begins to break down the leaves and the leaves start to wilt. After 5 to 10 minutes, the leaves will start to look like steamed or wilted spinach. I will know when they're ready when they lose their shape and they get darker and flimsy. At this point, the leaves are close to the state I need to be in so that I can add the silk fabric. A little more to go and we'll be ready. Before I put the silk under the leaves, I need to gently rinse it in water and then wring out any excess. I open up the fabric because as I'm massaging the leaves, I want them to touch as much surface area as possible because I want to try to get an even distribution of dye, even though it's hard to achieve that with this method. I am going to pour a little more salt as I begin massaging the leaves onto the fabric. It can take about 20 minutes for this process. The longer I do this process, the more shrunken and wilted the leaves become, so I sometimes decide to add more leaves. More leaves means I need to add more salt and continue massaging. When the leaves get really wilted, I can pick them up and squeeze all of them onto the fabric in between my hands, kind of like I'm kneading dough into a ball or rolling clay into a ball. The longer I do this, the texture and the feel of the leaves change and they start to get a little sticky and I can see some of the blue liquid coming out. I can also continue adding fresh leaves to make sure I am getting the darker blue that I desire. When I think I've done this long enough, like 15 minutes at least, I sometimes will remove the leaves and take a look at the fabric. It will be sort of a greenish turquoise. Indigo works in a very special way where air or oxygen needs to hit the fabric in order for the color to oxidize and turn from greenish to more blue. If I'm not satisfied with the color as it is at this point, I can, instead of continuing to massage it, place it back under the leaves. And I can leave the leaves on top of the fabric for 30 minutes to an hour. An hour later, the color, as you can see, is a lot bluer. To help oxidize further, I can pour white vinegar into water and then dip the fabric into the vinegar water. After the vinegar rinse, you can see the fabric is definitely a lot bluer. The species of indigo I used today is Japanese indigo. This Japanese indigo is part of the Natural Dye Garden at Hidden Harvest Community Farm in Baltimore, Maryland, where Japanese indigo and other natural dye plants have been cultivated and processed by artists Kenya Miles and Rosa Chang with support from the Fiber Department at MICA and the community under the Natural Dye Initiative. There are many different methods for dyeing with indigo. Rosa has studied traditional methodology from her home country, South Korea, and from Japan.
The first indigo method and tradition I learned was from the Japanese indigo dye studio in Brooklyn, the place where I used to work. I learned about the Tsukumo method from that place. The Tsukumo process is basically a composting process. So harvest indigo plants and then sort out only leaves and then dry them and then do the composting process for around 100 days and then making an indigo bed out of it. You learn about the whole life cycle from the natural indigo vat, basically. That's the method I really appreciate and learn. And then later, I realized that my mother country also has a very strong, deep-rooted indigo tradition and practice. I'm originally from Seoul, Korea. When I was a kid, I really didn't learn or heard about indigo. And later I moved to the state and working for Indigo Studio, and then I also got into research even more. Then I was very excited about connecting myself into my ancestor around the indigo world, basically. They mainly do the water extraction process, which is not composting process. You basically harvest indigo plants and then after that you submerge it into the water, and then a couple days later you will notice that the color being changed as a turquoise color because of the indigo pigments being bleed from the leaves. I just want to show the color.
In this video, Rosa is lifting up the weight that had been holding the leaves down. The leaves rest in this water for anywhere from 1 to 3 days. After the leaves are fermented, they're removed and an alkaline substance is added. The traditional Korean alkaline substance is burnt oyster shell powder, whereas I use slaked lime. 1 tablespoon of slaked lime per gallon of water. The next step is aerating or adding oxygen to the vat, which I'm doing here with a hand immersion blender. After adding oxygen, the water foams and turns blue. The pigment settles to the bottom of the vat and eventually dries into this.
By the way, both Korea and Japan, they share the same indigo species called the Polygonum tinctorium, Parascara tinctoria. The nickname called the Japanese indigo. I mean, of course, both areas have more than one indigo plants, but the particular plants I'm talking about is called the Polygonum tinctorium plants. So this is known as Japanese indigo, and in Korea we call it jok.
While many U.S. dyers use Japanese indigo, it was not the southern cash crop. The cash crop in the South and colonial America is Indigofera tinctoria, this plant here, which we are also growing in Washington Park at Old Stone House. Here's the final image of what my fabric with the salt rub method looked like after it dried. We hope you will visit us at Old Stone House at Washington Park and see the plants for yourself. Thank you.